You really should have turned around the moment you saw the gate, Alicia said, her voice calm, almost gentle, as the night air held its breath around her. The porch light flickered once, casting a warm amber glow across the quiet property, just under an acre of land bordered by tall pines that swayed softly in the late evening breeze. Gravel crunched under heavy boots as Derek Cole stepped forward, a smirk stretching across his face like he owned every inch of ground he touched. Behind him, a few men lingered, their silhouettes loose and confident, the kind of posture that came from never being told no. Alicia didn't move. Barefoot on the wooden boards, she stood still, shoulders relaxed, eyes steady, as if she had been expecting this exact moment down to the second. The front door behind her remained slightly open, just enough to let a thin line of light spill across the floor, revealing nothing inside except shadows layered too neatly to be accidental. Derek glanced around, slow, assessing, but not cautious, never cautious. "Nice place," he muttered, his tone laced with something between amusement and dismissal. Shame if something happened to it. A faint breeze brushed past, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain, and for a split second, something in the stillness shifted. Alicia tilted her head, just slightly, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Somewhere far off, a car door shut. Not close enough to matter. Not yet. "You don't belong here," Derek added, stepping closer, his boots stopping just short of the first step. The porch creaked softly under Alicia's weight as she shifted, not back, not forward, just enough to center herself. Her hands rested loosely at her sides, fingers relaxed, but her posture changed in a way that was almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. Balanced, grounded, ready. The kind of stillness that wasn't fear, but control. One of the men behind Derek let out a low chuckle, the sound echoing too loud in the quiet yard, like it didn't belong there. Alicia's eyes moved past them for just a fraction of a second, scanning the perimeter, the tree line, the shadows between parked vehicles. Every angle accounted for, every exit measured. When her gaze returned, it was sharper, clearer, as if something had locked into place behind it. "Last chance," she said softly, the words barely louder than the wind, but they landed heavier than anything Derek expected. He laughed, shaking his head, stepping onto the first stair like he was accepting a challenge he didn't understand. The wood gave a small, hollow knock under his boot. Alicia didn't react. Not yet. The porch lights steadied above them, no longer flickering, casting both of them in the same quiet glow. Equal distance. Unequal awareness. In the silence that followed, something unseen shifted again, subtle as a breath. Alicia exhaled slowly, steady, controlled, her chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm. And for the first time since they arrived, Derek hesitated, not because of what he saw, but because of what he suddenly couldn't read. Then, from somewhere just out of sight, a faint static crackled through the air. Alicia didn't reach for anything. She didn't look away. But deep in her pocket, a small radio came alive with a single whisper of sound, just enough to be real, just enough to change everything. "You hear that?" Alicia said quietly, not to Derek, not to the men behind him, but to the silence itself, as if the night had answered her first. The faint crackle from her pocket faded just as quickly as it came, leaving behind a stillness that felt heavier than before, like the air itself had shifted direction. Derek narrowed his eyes, trying to place what had changed, but nothing looked different. The same porch, the same woman, the same quiet stretch of land that should have made this easy. And yet, something no longer felt predictable. Alicia took a slow breath, her gaze drifting past him again, not distracted, but calculating, measuring distances in a way that did not belong to someone caught off guard. The tree line stood about 30 yards out, dense enough to hide movement, but too still to suggest it. The gravel driveway curved out toward the road, nearly 50 feet of open space with no cover, every inch exposed under the soft glow of a distant street lamp. She already knew the layout. She had memorized it the day she moved in. Every angle, every blind spot, every way in and out. "You picked a quiet place," Derek said, though his voice carried less certainty now, his eyes flicking briefly toward the shadows as if expecting them to move. Alicia's lips pressed together for a second, not quite a smile, but close enough to unsettle him. "That was the point," she replied, her tone even, almost conversational, like they were discussing weather instead of territory. One of the men behind Derek shifted his weight, boots scraping lightly against the gravel, the sound sharp against the quiet. It echoed longer than it should have. Alicia's head tilted again, just slightly, her focus narrowing for a fraction of a second before returning to Derek. She did not rush. She did not raise her voice. But there was something in the way she stood that made the distance between them feel smaller, tighter, like the space itself was closing in. Derek stepped fully onto the porch now, the wood creaking beneath him, and for the first time, he hesitated not because of fear, but because he could not read her. Most people reacted. Most people showed something. Anger, panic, defiance. Alicia showed none of it. Just control. Absolute, unshaken control. You live out here alone? He asked, testing, probing, looking for a crack in the surface. Alicia's eyes met his, steady and unblinking. No, she said after a beat, her voice low and certain. The word hung there, simple, but wrong in a way Derek could not immediately explain. He glanced over his shoulder, expecting movement, expecting backup, expecting anything that made sense of it. Nothing, just the same empty yard, the same quiet road stretching beyond the gate. And yet, the feeling remained. Alicia shifted her weight again, subtle, precise, her stance aligning with something unseen, like she was following a pattern only she understood. Her breathing never changed. Not faster, not heavier, just steady, measured, trained. The porch light hummed softly above them, casting long shadows that stretched across the boards, merging and separating with the slightest movement. Derek swallowed, the motion small but noticeable, his confidence no longer as solid as it had been seconds ago. Then who else is here? He asked, his voice lower now, more cautious than he intended. Alicia did not answer right away. She let the silence stretch, let it settle, let it do the work for her. Then, almost gently, she said, "You already stepped into it." And this time, when the faint static returned from her pocket, it did not fade. It stayed, low and steady, like a heartbeat just beneath the surface. The static grew clearer, no longer a whisper but a steady presence, low and controlled, like someone waiting for a signal that had not yet been given. Alicia did not move, but something in her focus sharpened, her eyes tracking Derek not just as a person, but as a variable in a space she already understood. Derek felt it before he understood it, that subtle shift where control slips without warning. He glanced back again, slower this time, scanning the yard, the driveway, the edges of the property that suddenly felt less empty than they had a moment ago. The men behind him exchanged brief looks, their confidence thinning into something quieter, something closer to uncertainty. "You playing games?" Derek asked, but his voice no longer carried the same weight. Alicia exhaled slowly, her breath steady in the cool night air, her posture unchanged, balanced as if she had been standing there for hours instead of minutes. "No," she said simply. "I just do not repeat myself." The porch light cast a soft glow across her face, revealing nothing but calm, no anger, no fear, just a level of awareness that did not match the situation Derek thought he had walked into. One of the men near the driveway shifted again, turning his head toward the road, as if he had heard something just beyond range. A distant engine, maybe, or maybe nothing at all. The sound did not matter. The reaction did. Alicia noticed. She always noticed. Her gaze flicked once, measuring the distance again, calculating time without looking like she was calculating anything. 30 yards to the tree line, 50 feet to the road, less than 10 feet between her and Derek. Every number already set in place. Derek took another step forward, slower now, testing the ground, the space, the silence that pressed in tighter with each second. "You think someone is coming?" he asked, almost casually. But there was a tension underneath it now, something he could not quite hide. Alicia's eyes met his again, steady, unwavering. "I know exactly what is already here," she replied. The words landed differently this time, heavier, more certain, like a fact instead of a warning. The static in her pocket pulsed once, clearer than before, followed by a faint click, the kind that came from a line opening on the other end. Alicia did not reach for it. She did not need to. The message was not for them. It never was. Derek's jaw tightened, his instincts catching up to something his mind had not fully accepted yet. This was not random. This was not luck. And whatever he had stepped into, It was not under his control anymore. The porch creaked softly as he shifted his weight, the sound echoing louder than it should have in the growing silence. Alicia adjusted her stance by an inch, subtle enough to miss if you were not looking for it, precise enough to matter if you were. Her shoulders aligned, her center grounded, her breathing still slow and even, like everything was moving exactly as expected. Then, from somewhere deeper in the darkness beyond the trees, a faint reflection flickered, gone as quickly as it appeared, but real enough to change the air. Derek saw it. This time, he knew he did. And for the first time since he stepped through the gate, he stopped moving completely. The reflection did not return, but its absence felt louder than its presence had been, like a signal that had already been received and no longer needed repeating. Derek's eyes stayed locked on the tree line, his breathing no longer as steady as before, each inhale slightly sharper than the last as his mind worked to explain what his instincts had already accepted. This place was not empty. It had never been empty. Alicia watched him without moving, her gaze calm, patient, as if she had seen this moment unfold many times before in many different forms. "You saw it," she said quietly, not as a question, but as confirmation. Derek did not answer right away. He shifted his weight again, slower this time, careful, like the ground itself might respond differently if he moved too fast. Behind him, one of the men turned fully toward the trees now, his posture no longer relaxed, his shoulders tightening as his attention narrowed. Another took a step back without realizing it, boots scraping softly against the gravel, the sound too loud in the silence that had settled over the property. Alicia noticed every inch of it, every hesitation, every adjustment, every crack in their certainty. Her head tilted just slightly again, listening, measuring, aligning herself with something beyond what they could see. The static in her pocket steadied into a low, constant presence, no longer random, no longer uncertain, but controlled, deliberate, like a conversation happening just outside their reach. Derek finally looked back at her, really looked this time, not at her face, not at her posture, but at the way she existed in the space around her. She was not reacting. She was not adjusting. She was already positioned, already prepared, like everything happening now had been anticipated long before he stepped through that gate. "What is this?" he asked, his voice lower, stripped of the confidence he had carried in with him. Alicia did not answer immediately. She let the question settle, let it hang in the air where it belonged. The porch light hummed softly above them, steady and unchanging, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch further with each passing second. Somewhere down the road, a distant engine slowed, not close enough to interrupt, but close enough to matter. Alicia's eyes flicked once toward the sound, then back to Derek, her focus never breaking. "It is already in motion," she said finally, her voice even, controlled, like she was stating something that could not be undone. Derek's jaw tightened again, his gaze shifting between her and the darkness beyond, his mind searching for something familiar to hold on to. Control. He needed control. "You called someone," he said, more to convince himself than her. Alicia's expression did not change. "No," she replied. "I just made sure I was not the only one paying attention." The words landed. Heavier than before, not loud, not aggressive, but certain in a way that left no room for argument. One of the men near the driveway took another step back, this time fully aware of it, his eyes scanning the edges of the property, the shadows between the trees, the spaces where something could be waiting. The air felt tighter now, thinner, like the space itself had shifted around them. Alicia adjusted her stance again by a fraction, her balance perfect, her breathing still slow and steady, like she was anchored to something deeper than the moment itself. Then, from the darkness beyond the tree line, a second flicker appeared, not random this time, but deliberate, followed by another, spaced apart, controlled. Not movement, not accident. Signal. Derek saw it clearly now. All of them did. And this time, no one laughed. No one spoke. The silence that followed was not empty anymore. It was occupied. And for the first time, Derek understood that whatever was happening here had already moved past him. No one moved after the second signal. It lingered in the distance like a quiet decision that had already been made, something beyond their control and already closing in. Derek felt it settle into his chest, not as fear yet, but as pressure, the kind that builds when the rules you rely on stop working. He glanced at the men behind him, expecting someone to speak, to laugh it off, to restore the balance he had walked in with, but no one did. Their eyes were no longer on Alicia. They were scanning, searching, trying to understand what they had stepped into without realizing it. Alicia remained exactly where she was, her posture unchanged, her breathing still slow and measured, like time moved differently for her than it did for them. The porch light above her cast a steady glow, outlining her silhouette with a quiet certainty that made the space around her feel anchored, controlled. "You planned this," Derek said finally, his voice lower, tighter, as if saying it out loud might give it shape, might make it something he could fight. Alicia's gaze held his, calm and unwavering. "No," she replied, just as steady as before. "I prepared." The difference landed heavier than he expected. Prepared meant this was not reaction. It meant this moment was not a surprise. It meant he had walked into something that had already been waiting. One of the men near the driveway took another step back, his boots grinding softly against the gravel, the sound sharp and out of place. He looked toward Derek, waiting for instruction, for direction, for anything that would restore the sense of control they had lost somewhere between the gate and the porch. Derek did not answer him. He could not. His focus stayed on Alicia, trying to read her, trying to find something human in her stillness, something predictable. But there was nothing to grab onto. Just that same quiet control, that same steady presence that did not shift no matter how the situation changed. The static in her pocket pulsed again, clearer now, followed by a faint voice too low to make out, but unmistakably there. Not imagination, not coincidence. Communication. Derek heard it this time. So did the others. The realization moved through them without words, visible in the way their shoulders tightened, the way their stance changed from forward to uncertain, from aggressive to cautious. Alicia did not reach for the device. She did not acknowledge it outwardly, but something in her focus sharpened again, like she had received exactly what she needed. "You should leave," she said quietly, her voice carrying no threat, no urgency, just certainty. Derek almost laughed, the sound catching in his throat before it could fully form. Leave meant giving up control. Leave meant admitting he had misread the situation. Leave meant walking away without understanding why. He had never done that before. "And if we do not?" he asked, forcing the question out, trying to regain footing in a space that no longer felt stable. Alicia held his gaze for a long second, letting the silence answer before she did. "Then you stay," she said. The words were simple, but something about them shifted the air again, made the space feel smaller, tighter, like the edges of the property had moved closer without anyone noticing. Another flicker appeared beyond the trees, then another, spaced with intention, controlled, not random. Positions. Markers. Presence. Derek's eyes followed them, tracking the pattern without understanding it, but feeling its weight. The men behind him noticed too now, their movements slowing, their confidence draining into something quieter, something closer to realization. This was not escalation. This was containment. Alicia adjusted her stance one final time, subtle, precise, her center aligned, her breathing unchanged. She was not waiting anymore. She was ready. And for the first time since the night began, Derek understood that whatever came next would not be decided by him. The night did not move, but everything inside it shifted, like a held breath that refused to release. Alicia lowered her chin just slightly, her eyes no longer scanning, no longer measuring, but settled, locked into a stillness that felt final. The signals beyond the trees stopped flickering, not because they were gone, but because they no longer needed to announce themselves. Presence had already been established. Positions had already been taken. Derek felt it in the quiet, in the way the air pressed closer around him, thinner now, heavier, like the space itself had chosen a side. One of the men behind him cleared his throat softly, the sound barely there, but loud enough to break the illusion that they still controlled anything about this moment. No one responded. No one even looked at him. Their attention was stretched outward, pulled toward the unseen edges of the property, toward the places where something existed without showing itself. Alicia's breathing remained slow, deliberate, each inhale steady, each exhale controlled, like a metronome keeping time for something only she could hear. Her hands stayed at her sides, relaxed, but there was a quiet readiness in the way her fingers rested, like she did not need to move until the exact moment required it. Derek shifted again, just a fraction, but it was enough. The porch creaked under his weight, the sound echoing longer than it should have, exposing the tension he could no longer hide. He glanced toward the driveway, then back to Alicia, then toward the trees again, his focus splitting, searching for something certain in a situation that offered none. "This does not make sense," he said, more to himself than anyone else, his voice lower, stripped of the authority he had carried in. Alicia heard it. She always heard everything. "It does," she replied quietly, her tone unchanged, calm in a way that made his uncertainty feel louder. "You just walked into it too late." The words settled into the silence, not as a threat, not as a warning, but as a conclusion. Derek swallowed, the motion slow, deliberate, his mind catching up to a reality he did not choose. This was never about force. This was never about confrontation. This was about control, and he no longer had it. The faint voice in Alicia's pocket returned, clearer now, a single word forming just enough to be recognized before it softened back into static. She did not respond out loud. She did not need to. Her eyes lifted slightly, not toward the men in front of her, but past them, beyond them, toward the perimeter that now held them in place. One of the men near the road took a step backward, then stopped, his posture tightening, as if he had reached an invisible line he could not cross. Another turned slightly, only to pause mid-movement, his shoulders stiffening as realization settled in without explanation. There was nowhere to go that had not already been accounted for. Alicia remained centered, her presence quiet but absolute, like the anchor point of everything unfolding around them. "You said we should leave," Derek muttered, the words slower now, heavier, as if repeating them might change their meaning. Alicia's gaze returned to him, steady, unwavering. "I did," she said. A long pause followed, stretching between them, filled with everything unspoken, everything understood too late. Derek looked toward the gate, toward the road, toward the open space that no longer felt open at all. The night remained still, but it was no longer empty. It was watching. It was holding. And Alicia stood at the center of it, unmoved, as the moment closed in around them without a single step being taken. "Agent Brooks, confirm containment," the voice said, clear this time, no longer hidden beneath static, no longer distant, but present, controlled, and unmistakably real. The words settled into the space like a final piece clicking into place, quiet but undeniable. Derek's head turned slowly toward Alicia, his expression no longer confused, no longer searching, but fixed in a realization that came too late to change anything. The men behind him froze in place, their posture shifting from uncertainty to something heavier, something closer to understanding. Alicia did not reach for the radio. She did not need to. Her eyes lifted slightly, her focus aligning with something beyond them, something already in motion. "Confirmed," she said, her voice calm, steady, carrying no strain, no urgency, just precision. The silence that followed was different now. It was no longer empty or tense. It was settled, decided. Derek exhaled slowly, the sound barely there, his shoulders lowering just a fraction as the weight of the moment finally pressed through whatever resistance he had left. "You are not just living out here," he said, the words measured, no longer a challenge, but a conclusion. Alicia's gaze returned to him, steady, composed. "No," she replied. The simplicity of the answer made it heavier. There was no explanation offered, no elaboration needed. Everything around them had already said enough. From the tree line, faint movement became visible now, not sudden, not aggressive, but controlled, deliberate, figures stepping forward just enough to be seen without breaking the stillness of the night. No rush, no chaos, just presence. The distance that once felt open now felt structured, defined by lines that had already been drawn. Derek watched it unfold, his eyes tracking each movement, each shadow resolving into something real, something undeniable. This was not reaction. This was design. Alicia shifted her weight by a fraction, her stance easing slightly, not because the moment had passed, but because it had reached its point. Her breathing remained even, her posture grounded, her focus clear. She was no longer waiting. She was holding. One of the men near the driveway lifted his hands slightly, uncertain, not in surrender, but in hesitation, as if his body had already made a decision his mind had not fully accepted. Another look toward the gate again, then stopped, the realization settling deeper with each passing second. There was no direction left to move that had not already been accounted for. Derek remained where he was, his gaze fixed on Alicia now, no longer trying to read her, no longer trying to understand her, but recognizing what she represented. "You knew we were coming," he said, his voice quieter, stripped of everything it had carried before. Alicia did not deny it. She did not confirm it. She simply met his gaze and let the silence answer for her. The radio in her pocket clicked once more, a subtle confirmation that needed no words. Alicia's eyes flicked briefly toward the perimeter, then back to Derek, her expression unchanged. Calm, certain, complete. The porch light above them hummed softly, casting a steady glow over a moment that no longer belonged to him. And in that quiet, with the night fully settled and every unseen line now visible, Derek finally understood that he had never been in control of this situation, not for a single second since he stepped through that gate. The figures at the edge of the property did not rush in, did not shout, did not break the silence that had already taken control of the night. They moved with quiet precision, each step measured, each position intentional, like pieces settling into a pattern that had been designed long before this moment began. Alicia remained still on the porch, her presence unchanged, her focus steady as she watched the perimeter close in without a single command being raised. Derek's eyes followed the movement, slower now, absorbing what he could no longer deny. This was not chance. This was not luck. This was structure. "You set this up," he said again, but the words no longer carried accusation. They carried understanding. Alicia did not respond immediately. She let the scene speak for itself, let the quiet order of it replace anything she might have said. The men behind Derek shifted subtly, their posture no longer forward, no longer challenging, but uncertain, suspended between instinct and realization. One glanced toward the road again, then stopped, his shoulders tightening. As he recognized the same truth the others were beginning to accept, there was no open path left. Every direction had been accounted for. Every exit had already been closed without being touched. Alicia finally moved, just a single step forward, slow, deliberate, her bare foot pressing softly against the wooden boards. The sound was almost nothing, but it drew every eye back to her instantly. She did not raise her voice. She did not change her expression, but the shift in her position was enough. It marked the moment. "This does not have to go further," she said quietly, her tone even, controlled, offering something that was not force, not pressure, but clarity. Derek looked at her, really looked this time, not searching for weakness, not measuring distance, but seeing her for what she was in this moment. Not someone reacting, someone deciding. The radio in her pocket clicked once more, a soft confirmation that aligned perfectly with everything unfolding around them. Alicia's gaze flicked briefly toward the tree line, then back to Derek, her focus never breaking. "You came onto private property," she continued, her voice steady, grounded in something that did not need to be explained. "You made a choice." The words were simple, but they carried weight, not because of how they were said, but because of what had already been revealed. Derek exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly, not from relief, but from acceptance. The men behind him mirrored it, small shifts in posture, subtle releases of resistance, like something inside them had already adjusted to a reality they could not change. The night remained quiet, but it was no longer tense. It was resolved. The figures at the edge of the property held their positions, visible now but still distant, their presence enough without needing to move closer. Alicia stood centered, calm, unshaken, her stance no longer defensive, no longer reactive, but complete. "So what happens now?" Derek asked, his voice lower, stripped of everything it had carried before. Alicia met his gaze, steady and certain. "Now you decide what you do next," she said. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of choice, of consequence, of understanding that had come too late to undo what had already begun. Derek looked toward the gate one more time, then back at Alicia, then at the figures beyond the trees. The answer was already there. It had been there from the moment he stepped through. And now, standing in the center of something he never saw coming, he realized the only control he had left was whether he accepted it. The silence did not break when the decision settled in. It deepened, softened, like the night itself had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Derek stood still for a moment longer, his gaze moving slowly across the property, no longer searching for an opening, no longer measuring distance, but taking in what had always been there, what he had failed to see. The trees, the shadows, the quiet road beyond the gate. All of it now carried a weight he had not noticed before. Alicia did not move. She did not rush him. Her presence remained steady, grounded, as if time no longer pressed on her the way it did on him. The porch light above cast a warm, unwavering glow, outlining her figure against the darkness, calm and unshaken. Derek finally lowered his shoulders, just slightly, the tension leaving in a slow, controlled release. It was not defeat in the way he had known it before. It was clarity. The men behind him shifted as well, small movements, subtle acknowledgments that mirrored his own. No one spoke. No one needed to. The choice had already been made. Derek took a step back, careful, deliberate, the wood beneath his boots giving a soft creak that no longer echoed with defiance, but with acceptance. He turned his head once more toward Alicia, meeting her eyes, not with challenge, not with resistance, but with understanding. "You were right," he said quietly, the words simple, stripped of everything unnecessary. Alicia held his gaze for a moment, then gave the slightest nod, not in victory, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement. Nothing more. Nothing needed. The figures at the edge of the property remained where they were, their presence unchanged, steady, watchful, but no longer advancing. The moment had resolved without force, without escalation, exactly as it had been intended. Derek stepped off the porch, the distance between them widening again, but this time it felt different. Not like retreat, like closure. The men followed, one by one, their movements slower now, quieter, as if they were aware of every step they took. The gravel shifted under their feet as they made their way back toward the gate, the sound soft, almost respectful in the stillness. Alicia watched them go without turning, her posture unchanged, her breathing still even, as if nothing about her needed to adjust now that the moment had passed. The radio in her pocket clicked once more, a soft confirmation that required no response. Everything had already been handled. At the gate, Derek paused briefly, his hand resting on the metal for just a second before pushing it open. He glanced back once, not out of defiance, not out of doubt, but as if to fix the image of this place, this moment, into something he would not forget. Alicia remained on the porch, framed by the warm light, still and composed, her presence as steady as when he had first seen her. Then he turned and stepped through, the gate closing behind him with a quiet final sound that seemed to seal everything in place. The road stretched out ahead, empty again, just as it had been before, but nothing about it felt the same. Back on the porch, Alicia stood alone once more, the night settling gently around her, the air lighter now, quieter, as if the tension had been carried away with the departing footsteps. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders easing by the smallest degree, the only sign that anything had shifted at all. The porch light hummed softly above, steady and unchanged, casting its warm glow across a space that had returned to stillness. And in that quiet, with the wind moving gently through the trees and the world beyond the gate fading back into distance, Alicia remained exactly where she had been from the start, calm, grounded, and unmoved, as if the night had simply passed through her and left nothing behind.